My name is Clever Palta. I'm a senior DevOps consultant for Release Team, and today I will be talking about optimizing resource tracking in Jira Cloud. Before we get into it, just let me introduce myself. I have 10 years in experience in DevOps, service desk management, and configuration and data management. I'm an Atlassian certified individual, although I do have to renew a lot of my certs after this call. A lot of them are running out at the end of the year. I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm a Rockies fan, boo. Nuggets fan, yay. I love going to shows. One of my previous jobs or hats that I wore was a manager for bands, and I did use a lot of Jira and organizing contracts and tours and all that. And when I'm not at home or in front of a computer, I'm embarrassing myself at your local 24-hour fitness gym, and I'm playing Pokemon. Um, Perfect. Okay. Um, Before I start, let me talk a little bit about Release Team, the company I consult for. Um, they're DevOps tools specialists. All our consultants are based out of US and Canada. We have 25 years of experience in the field as a company. We do all sorts of consulting services. We've done a lot of cloud migrations recently for Jira and JSM, especially with that data center end of life coming up. I'm sure a lot of folks have that on their roadmap. We do a lot of implementations, staff augmentations, and we're also Atlassian Gold Solution Partner. Here's a list of some of our clients, ranging all throughout the public and private sector, throughout all sorts of industries. Personally, I've worked on defense, IT, health, government, and yeah, all our clients are US and Canada based. This is a list of our partners. Personally, I work a lot with Atlassian, GitLab, and with Tempo and JFrog. So a quick agenda. We'll talk about what resource tracking is, and then we'll talk about avoiding common pitfalls when implementing resource tracking in Jira. And then we'll talk through a few implementations, and there's gonna be like a narrative thread throughout this talk. We're gonna talk about 3 different companies that we'll be implementing resource tracking with, example companies, all with varying level of complexity and needs in their company. And then we'll have a little Q&A in the end where not only will you be able to ask me questions, I'll also ask you guys questions. Not a quiz though. I mean, resource tracking, there's many ways to do it. And I just want to get everyone's finger on the pulse on how they personally done implementations. So what is resource tracking? Resource tracking is the process of monitoring the usage of resources, tracking their availability and reporting and their performance. It involves collecting data about the use of resources, analyzing that data, and taking action to optimize resource use and ensure that project goals are met. A lot of people just get tripped up on resource. Resource can also mean, your employees, the people who are doing the work, That tripped me up at the beginning too. It's like resources, are we trying to see, memory usage within your data set and servers or anything like that? No. Resources in the context of this talk will be all the folks doing work or, being in the team. Resource tracking can also include monitoring the time spent on specific tasks, tracking project costs, and keeping track of materials and equipment used in the project. This data can then be used to identify areas of inefficiency or overuse and to make adjustments to resource allocation in order to improve project outcomes. In addition to managing resources, resource tracking can also be used to provide stakeholders with progress updates and to ensure that projects are staying on track. And that'll be the use case of a lot of the clients that you might need to work on when you're implementing resource tracking using Jira. So before we even start talking about solutions, automations, optimizing workflows, there's a lot of human elements in psychology when it comes to resource tracking. So we'll talk about a few of those before we, architect the perfect solution in Jira. According to the market research firm Gantic, the biggest cause of stress in the workplace is uneven workflow or too much workload. Using some of the resource tracking techniques that we'll go over in this presentation will help avoid some of these issues. And the proactive use and monitoring will ensure that workloads are equally distributed, and it will avoid help work overload, which in turn, the last thing we want as managers or folks responsible of resources is to fully believe in the reports that are being generated by Jira or any resource tracking tool that you're using without acknowledging any gaps that may exist in the work that isn't being tracked on the tools or shadow work. This is where communication is key. You should be talking to your resources, your team leads, your employees often, and you try to see what work isn't being tracked in your tools. And we got to find a way to implement it and track it in the tools, even if it doesn't align with a customer project, even if it's just administrative work or training. It's very important that we know how much work is being done in these tasks, because we can generate these wonderful reports, which what we think is accurate data, but if our tools aren't configured correctly and we take all these reports as gospel without using a little bit of critical thinking, we could still have a lot of workload overload or imbalances in your teams. Capacity tracking tools are great at managing and planning work, but as a team lead or a consultant or an admin or whatever role you might have in your day-to-day, it's important to never forget about the human element, which is a little tricky now since there's a lot of distributed teams. Raise of hands, show of hands, how many folks go into an office every day for their work? Congrats. But for a lot of us, it's getting trickier and trickier to see, sorry for the informality, the general vibes are in the office. Are folks still cordial? Are we talking to each other? Or do you see some emotional signs that your team might be overloaded? Some common signs are irritability, frustration, some newfound indifference to work. If one of your high achievers is all of a sudden not meeting deadlines or missing a lot of work, or there's a lot of absenteeism out of nowhere, those are usually signs that there's a decent amount of work imbalance or overload in your team. One way to recognize those that are going above and beyond is by giving gifts or words of recognition. If you work for a bigger company, I'm sure there's portals you can go through to get some certificates of appreciation shown or some gift cards. But if you're in a smaller company or a startup, it is very important to acknowledge all of these high achieving folks. And with some of the resource tracking tools that we're going to talk about, it'll be a lot easier to track and notice these high achievers. So those are some common resource tracking pitfalls that I've seen a lot in my experience. And there's no silver bullet. There's no tool that's magically going to tell you exactly how much work everyone is doing. So it's very important to not forget the human element, which is harder when a lot of your calls are just Zoom meetings with everyone's camera off. So communication is still key even in this age of distributed work. So how can we implement resource tracking in Jira? That's a loaded question. That's like asking, how do you play guitar? Yeah, there's some basics to learn, but everyone has their own style. Everyone has their own preferred methods and way of doing it. I will show some of my preferred methods in this talk, but I do want to, pick everyone's mind here because I'm just one person. We're, a few dozen here, and I'm sure we have a lot of experience in resource tracking. So let's talk about resource tracking in Jira specifically. It can be accomplished in many ways, just like we can all play guitar or do anything, in our own style and fashion. Jira includes a lot of out-of-the-box project templates that can assist with the initial rollout of resource tracking. With a lot of my new clients, when we have our initial engagements and discovery calls, when I'm still trying to figure out how their instance works, how mature their instance is, how much work is being tracked, at the beginning, we have a lot of project managers who are like, yo, I looked up these 10 add-ons on Marketplace and I think they're all awesome and I really want to add them all. And I really want to start, especially with our first example, with all out-of-the-box items and workflows and features that Jira software has. I really don't like just adding add-ons for the sake of adding add-ons. I mean, it gets costly after a while, it gets hard to manage. I know a lot of the talks this week have been about how we have costs that are hidden until much later if we just implement everything our client or the folks we work for want. So I always try to push back, especially at the beginning. For more complex teams and resource tracking needs, I then maybe look at some third-party tools. I maybe then go and say, hey, we can't do this out of the box. We might need to use a few plugins or some, more portfolio management type tools since we're trying to track so many resources over so many projects. And out of the box, Jira really isn't too advanced, I would say, with that feature set. So let's introduce one of our 3 complex teams. We're gonna demo some different solutions with different levels of complexity in Jira with Jira resource tracking. So the first team that we've all been hired to, congrats by the way, is Advancing Technologies. They're a neat technology startup with 8 full-time engineers. They're a brand new company. They don't have any workflows, they don't have any boards. They have a product idea and they need help, tracking everything and executing. Their manager's like, hey, yeah, I looked up all these plugins. We're all using Jira and we really need a solution like yesterday. So my suggestion to them would be to spin up a project using one of the built-in templates, including in Jira Cloud. They want to be a Scrum, an Agile team. They don't really know what that means. And I'll do a little aside. I know yesterday there was a talk here, a panel about Agile. And a lot of folks have a lot of strong opinions on Agile. But for a lot of my new clients, whenever I try to get even, below surface level with Agile terminology, they just kind of look at me like I'm talking about, my favorite Pokemon or something like that. So there's like a lot of, like I said, people have strong opinions on Agile and how exactly to execute it and what terms to use. But for a lot of my clients, especially in the startup or, we're just getting started with tracking our work, they just want to hit the ground running quickly. And we want to build a solution that we can iteratively build over and get more of that feature set. So I am going to leave here and we're gonna go into Jira. So what we see here is, let's say, a space, a project board that we created just using that Jira Scrum template. We haven't changed any of the workflow yet, but we did get some items into the backlog and we have our first sprint going. We populated this sprint with work items and, we've kind of coached our PMs on assigning these work items, but for tracking resources specifically, just with basic Jira features, I always try to preach story points. If anyone, I mean, we all work with story points, especially if you're familiar with Agile at all. It's an estimate of how long we think the work is going to take to be completed. Most places have one story point be half a day, and we track it over here on the field, right there. When I show managers this right off the bat, they always try to point to like, but we can just estimate exactly how much time is being worked. And I want my resources to exactly track day by day all the work they're doing, which sounds good in theory. We want more data. We want to be able to have more, more data, more visibility into it. But what this methodology just does is that it just leads to more burnout. No one wants to update day by day, minute by minute on each work item. And you'll slowly but surely have a lot of opting out with your team. They might update this, for a week or two, but if, there's a lot of work, and if you're in a startup, so there's definitely going to be a lot of work. No one wants to deal with the overhead of updating this every time, getting reports spun up every time. So I always try to steer these managers or PMs into trusting story points and not micromanaging all their workers, especially right off the bat when we're just trying to get processes done. Work is being done. As we can see, it's Friday, it's the end of the sprint. We've gotten a lot of work done. We can look at the right column over here and look at all the work, magnificent work that we've completed. So day by day, I advise my managers to go to the reports and check out the burn down chart. This isn't a report they should be checking just at the end of the sprint. This is a report that they should be checking day by day, because if they were checking day by day, they would be like, whoa, our folks really didn't do too much during the week. We have a lot of work done here on Monday, and here on Thursday, Friday, we definitely got a lot of work pushed right at the end. But we would be able to see with this guideline that we're not really going in a fluid way. We might have a bottleneck somewhere in our process, or we might have folks that are just doing the work and then logging in on Friday and pushing everything to complete. But if we had our manager checking this report every day, they would be able to see how many story points we're completing every day. We would be able to click through and see the information within each ticket, see who is doing a lot of the work, and we would be able to use this in our sprints and our daily communications to see what's getting done. So then the manager usually says, cool, all right, we have a project going on. Folks are updating their tickets, their work items pretty decently. How can I check who's doing what? Well, out of the box, I usually point to, I usually either create a dashboard or a filter very quickly. Since we're working just on one project, I want to create my filter here live just to show that's a pretty straightforward process. I usually do this in front of the managers too, so they can also learn how to create their own filters and kind of get their own information. For me, it feels unethical to be the admin that's just like, yeah, I'll create the filter. I'll get all your requests, and I am the one gating everything. But that really doesn't really vibe with the whole holistic team. I don't want to be the single point of failure. And I feel like, I'm a consultant, so I'm not going to be there on a permanent basis. I want the team to be able to run itself once I'm gone, and I want to be able to teach how to use Jira so they can kind of run with it and not have to rely with me, or so I can work on more advanced features instead of just being the filter creation, man. So I would usually go, okay, yeah, let's filter by project. I want to have story points, so I can do my story. I can do by descending, ascending. Really quick pop quiz though. Why do we see story points in some of the work items but not the others? There's two answers. One of them is we just forgot to fill it out. Sorry, that's a coaching point. We should, before the beginning of the sprint, or even when this, I know a lot of people might get upset or have opinions about this next sentence, but maybe even when the sprint is in flight, we should just make sure to add story points to each work item, just so we can have proper tracking. Another reason why story points might not be populated in each item is because we haven't configured that work item to have that story points field. So according to your level of information, or what your overhead is, do you have a scrum master? Do we just have 8 people trying to figure it out by themselves? These are the variables I take in mind when I make a suggestion to either have story points just at the epic and story high level work item types, or do we want this to be tracked in tasks or subtasks? So that just depends on your client and the level of resources available and how much information that they want. So I would create this filter, save it, I would try it, then my next ask usually is, can I get this in Excel? Can you export this as a CSV? Which I will initially push back on because I want all the information to live in Jira, and if we need to track or add information, as a result from any analysis that's done from this filter, I would like that information to live in Jira. Maybe we need to add that as a field. Maybe that needs to live in the comment or added to the description somewhere. But that's just a way to have multiple sources of information and information silos to pop up right at the beginning of a project, which is something that we try to avoid. So another good report that I usually show brand new PMs or brand new teams is the epic report right here. So this is kind of like the burn down chart, except this is kind of geared towards the end of an epic or an end of a sprint. I like to see and filter through all my epics that I'm working on. I already have this filter set to story points, and we can see the burn down of all story points. And we can, by a glance, look at all incomplete issues and kind of organize them by size with our story points. And we can either allocate more resources to the ones that might be stuck somewhere, or we might see, oh, we really have a bottleneck somewhere. And my favorite chart for analyzing bottlenecks is the cumulative flow diagram, right over here. Hotel Wi-Fi. So we see that there's still a decent amount of items in our to-do. We might, just from a glance, I can see maybe we, overestimated the capacity of our team. Maybe, we need to trim down or be more realistic about what we can get done within a week. Maybe we need more resources. Maybe our resources are misaligned. And then I see that there are a lot of items, in progress, which makes sense. But testing is not a bottleneck. We don't see a lot of items just live in testing and never go anywhere. So just from this report, I would just advise, uh, you know, I would just reorganize our capacity or see what our resources are doing or be more realistic about how much work is being assigned. So any questions before we go on to our next company? Solid. Well, congrats on doing resource tracking for your first company. With that experience, you have been giving advancement in your career path. You are now with Beta Inc. Beta Inc. is a 3-year software development firm that has expanded to 20 employees in 3 different projects. They now have the need to track more resources across multiple projects. So around the point where we're managing different products and projects and our team count is going up, and if we are a project manager, this is around the point where I maybe talk about adding a third-party tool. So for this demo, for this company, I might talk about adding Structure by Tempo. Structure is a portfolio management tool, and what I really like what it does that we can't do out of the box with Jira software, just vanilla Jira, is create a lot of filters. I mean, we have all right, let me get out of the slide. Out of the box, we have let me go to my project. I mean, we have the Gantt chart, we have a basic timeline, and we can create our own custom timelines where we have more projects. But I don't really like these filters too much. Like, yeah, I can choose all my work, but for me, the visualization just it's not really intuitive. There's multiple buttons. So for all of that, I like Structure. So we already have a structure here, but I want to show how simple it is to create one live. Just for this demo, I'm going to use speed mode. But if the power mode is good, if you have, 10 plus projects, a lot of resources, and you don't really want to invest in a tool like Jira Jira Align quite yet, because I know that's a little pricey and maybe out of the budget of a lot of the companies I work with. So that option is available if you want, any complex portfolio management. But for our needs, since we're just managing 3 additional projects, we can use Structure. Yeah. So we have a view with all the epics and stories throughout all our projects. Very simple, 3 columns. One of the features I like the most about Structure is the time in status that really isn't easily available in vanilla Jira. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add a column. I'm gonna, let me adjust. My neck hurts. We have like half an hour. So here, I'm going to add the time in status column. And we're going to use the current status, but we can also create one for each status that we have throughout our projects. And I mean, it would make sense if we also know what status each one of our work items are in. I forgot my ergonomic mouse at home, so I am struggling with the touchpad right now. So just at a glance now, we can see which one of these work items are our problem items. I mean, we have some stories that have been just sitting in our in our one of our in progress statuses for about a few hundred weeks. So we got to see what's going on there. So just as a resource tracking analysis, we would go in to each ticket, see who's the assignee, who's the team lead, and we kind of investigate what's going on there. So I really like structure for this reason. And also, if we want to just track an individual team or an individual assignee, I really like this by assignee view, so we can go through our entire team and just filter on and off of them and see all the work they've completed. And I feel like this type of reporting is using live data. Like always, we can export this into a spreadsheet. We can export this to any BI visualization that your company might be working with. But as a preference, like I said earlier, I really would prefer for all the data to live in Jira, if possible, just so we don't create data silos and create a lot more work for us in the future. So for Beta Inc., this would be my resource tracking solution. We can add 20 projects in here if we need. We know we can manage when we have like 8 employees here, but this tool scales up pretty well. And I mean, you saw how quick it was to create a structure. So we can really spin those up pretty quickly depending on our customer needs and our resource tracking needs. So congrats, you can put on your resume that you now manage X employees over Y teams, and you're getting a lot of hits on LinkedIn. So congrats to all of you on your promotion to Command Industries. Command Industries is a large defense contractor. They have advanced resource tracking needs and need to track tasks to deliverable and charge codes. Show of hands, how many people here have experience working in the defense industry? So you share the charge code and deliverable trauma that I have. Everything needs to be assigned, all work that's completed to a project needs to be tracked by a certain work code. All work needs to align with a certain deliverable in the contract, or not, we don't get paid. And that's a lot of overhead, but with your experience in tracking resources, we can come up with a solution to this dilemma. This is a use case that I think Jira Software Vanilla definitely does not handle very well. Some of my defense experience, we'll use some other tool outside of Jira to track time and track deliverables, and this always just turns into a data silo nightmare. You have one team tracking all deliverables through Microsoft Project or whatever external PPM. You have one team tracking all time with another time tracking piece of software that really doesn't talk to Jira and doesn't talk to Microsoft Project. So just this aspect alone, starts ballooning and starts taking over. We have 10 or 15 resources having to talk with each other and align and manually set deliverable hours and how much did we actually work. We don't know. It's very hard to track. So for this use case, I really like timesheets by Tempo. Timesheets is, what the name implies. It's you can track all time to a charge code or to any of your work items that you have within a Jira project. The reporting features are very nice. You just get, at the end of the week, one good report or as many custom reports as you want with all the information of all your resources, how many hours they've worked on each project and on each charge code, which will make it easier for you to hopefully get paid for the work that you've done and delivered. So let's take a quick look at that. So here on Tempo timesheets, you can see that, I have my timesheet filled out every day. I'll click on this column. We can choose all the work items that we are working on or that we have assigned, and we can automatically, we can choose how much time we've been tracking to each item. So because it is Friday, I'm gonna fill out my time card for Friday, which I need to do IRL outside of this example too. So here right away, we see 3 work items that are assigned to me. So there's a few ways I could have filled this time card out. I could just come up here. I know I've worked this for 4 hours today. And I have worked on another item that's been assigned to me on the mobile application app for 4 hours. I then go and submit my time card. In the background, we have all our accounts. So here we can keep track of all the customers that we're working with, and we can create individual accounts or charge codes. So if this were a real life defense project, I would have one charge code for every single deliverable that's in the contract, usually 50 to 60. I would then be able to go to each of my accounts or charge codes and assign them to a project. I could even assign them to a certain epic or a certain story. So with this functionality, we don't have to, have that 15-person overhead. If we set up our project structure correctly, we should just be able to automatically get the reporting done and get all our time tracked correctly. And this is also a cultural piece that you would have to implement in your workplace. I have to do a time card entry every day. Does anyone here have to do a time card entry every day, or is it more laissez-faire? Oh, Brian, okay. Yeah, we got 2. We got, yeah. I could show you the implementation, I could show you the accounts, but there's also a lot of communication that we have to do with our resources. We have to make sure they're updating their time cards every day, and we can have some automations built into a Jira where we can send an email, every day it's not filled out, but we want that to be kind of like a catch-all. We don't want to have to resort with that. We want to create a culture of communication that the last thing you do before you shut down your laptop for the day, whether that be 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock some nights, is to fill out your time card. So we could build as many silver bullet solutions as we want, but culture and communication will always be king when it comes to resource tracking. So then we would have a report generated like this. We could filter by charge code, by times, epics or stories, but I know in defense, you'll be looking at the deliverables, which hopefully are aligned to your epics, but if they're not, we would be able to configure our accounts and our charge codes to certain projects or certain work items. So that is what I have for resource tracking. Any questions? All right, don't be shy about it. But if not, I'm very curious in how you implemented resource tracking using Jira in the past. Has anyone done any approximate work to this? All right, I'm gonna come over here. Oh, or no, come on up. Come on, I'm sorry for calling you out.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Oh, what's your name?
My name is Olin.
Oh,
Olin
nice.
Flores. Yeah, thank you for your time here too. So I'm coming from a place where generally haven't done estimation. So I am presented with a team of 200 plus people, and I was tasked with like, yes, we need to estimate people. You know, and you need to convince everyone to use story points. So.
How did you tackle that? How much pushback was there in the beginning?
Well, there's still pushback. So what I did, because of course, I mean, it was hard for me to comprehend what story points actually measured and how to pick. So I get it, but I couldn't get my point across. So what I'm doing, I'm like, okay, fine. Let's measure your tasks by task effort. Mm-hmm. So I assign minimum effort, low, medium, high, maximum. But what I'm doing in the background, I am going to attempt to create an automation that links each individual of those effort levels to story points, so I can actually get my way to having story points.
And that's a good way to reduce friction too, because with the automations, we don't have to go in and do a story point, you know, estimate for each item. This is a medium priority item, so it should have X amount of story points.
Correct. Which,
you know, in our first example, we just wanted to build a base, but that's the type of iteration that we want to build whenever we mature and the folks that we're working with get comfortable with our processes. And then we get to derive more information like, yeah, medium priority item, probably like 4 story points, just based on all our reports and all the experience that we've had within the team. So I'm sure that automation wasn't built right at the beginning of you guys tracking all the work, right?
Right, well, and so I am building my case on showing the importance of story points, right? But that's how I'm working around, not having to convince 200 people to use story points. Like, okay, just use a task effort. And they're like, oh yeah, we like that. So, and then in the background, I'm just matching that to story points, the automation. So hopefully I can have some results I can show in a few months over the iteration.
Yeah. You say that there's still pushback to this day, right?
To use story points as a metric, right?
How have you combated that pushback, or how do you how have you tried to get more people on board with that concept?
Well, the question I asked them is, you're slammed with work, right? Yeah. How can you prove it?
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah, how can you prove it? It's like, well, look at my queue. It's like, well, how do I know what's more, like, can you show me complexity in your work on each individual item? It's like, well, no. Use story points.
Yeah.
But then the whole metric on using story points or t-shirt sizes, it was just a lot of friction for them. And that's why I was like, would you use task effort instead? You're still measuring complexity and risk. Yes, we like that. So that was my way to work around that and get to other precedent.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much,
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your experience. And yeah, it's a constant iterative process. It feels like it never ends sometimes, but that could be a good thing because all processes are, you know, organic. They grow, they decay, they have use. Sometimes we use them more than other processes. So, no, thank you for sharing your experience. Anyone else want to talk about the resource tracking experience? Oh, we have a question. You and then you. Okay. Right up here, this lady here. What's your name?
Robin.
Nice to meet you, Robin.
Nice to meet you. So we always have this question about, do we point bugs?
Point what?
Bugs.
Bugs. Ooh.
To be point.
Yeah.
So because it is part in production bugs, right, versus QA or CI bugs, because you count for it as part of your development, but when it hits production, do you count them? So yeah, because then it's double counting, I guess people talk about, but it's like then it hits your velocity, right? And so like, how do you track your resources when you have, you know, you're tracking your resources of 20% or 30% of your resources are going toward your bugs, right? Or your fixes, your defects, and you're not tracking your bugs, right? Because your points is based that you can't say, oh, I have 5 tickets. You have to do your velocity around points. So how do you solve that if you're not doing points?
So my jokey consultant answer would be, it depends. But no, I will give you some questions to ask like yourself and your team to kind of like remediate it. How important is velocity? You know, sometimes, you know, bugs happen. It might block us from a delivery or from hitting a deadline. And a lot of the time it's unforeseen. You know, as our cycles mature, we want to try to prevent this or kind of give ourselves, you know, a certain percentage cushion of velocity or story points that we might have to dedicate to bugs. But I know some managers might not be happy with, you know, additional story points being added mid-flight, but that's the reality of the situation. And we need to, if it's show-stopping bugs that will block us from delivery, in my opinion, they need to be added to the sprint. They need to be added to resource tracking, because we'll get a lot of workload imbalance, because it's like, oh, this story, you know, it was only 4 points. Why is it taking 2 weeks? Why is it taking 3 weeks? And we'll have a lot of unhappy people if we don't, you know, just admit to these are bugs that we found post-testing or post-QA that are showstoppers and we really need to track. So I err more on the side of tracking everything, even if it might paint an unflattering picture, because we don't know, we won't be able to remediate it in the future if we don't, you know, get that velocity and get that capacity realistically tracked. No worries. Yes.
I was going to share something that I've done, especially with teams that aren't like development teams or technical.
Your name, please. Sorry, before you start.
Hi, I'm Brianna Witherspoon.
Hey, Brianna.
Hey. I worked with a UX UI design team for a couple of years, and initially when starting with the team, I was trying to get an understanding of how they work together. And with UI UX projects, it's really hard to really define the steps and work and put them into a Jira mindset. To help with that, we broke our steps down into milestones, but they had a hard time visualizing like a 1 or a 2 in that effort, so we used fruit, different fruit sizes.
Ooh. What fruit sizes did you use?
It was a grape for a 1, and then like an apple for a 3, and then we went all the way up to 21, which was a watermelon, and you gotta cut the watermelon. So in smaller slices. But it really helped them adapt it. It was fun, and it made my life easier because it is reducing the friction, and I get what I need. And they tell me it's a grape, I put down a 1. And it helped as well to do, for me, I needed to have start and stop times. So I had an estimated start, estimated end on the epic level. And then on the story level, we had the actual start and actual end to try to track that time frame. I convinced them that all they had to do, if they did the status, when the status needed to be moved at its most accurate point, everything else would be done for them. And setting that up, setting the automation up helped smooth things over and made my life easier too. I was getting the details I needed to report, and all they had to do was move the status.
No, I mean, that's a very fun example, you know, because everyone's heard of the t-shirt size, but that's the first time I've heard of fruit. Just one question though, for the watermelon sized work items, did you ever consider moving them up to like epics? Because I mean, I'm sure those are work items that you need to decompose into smaller chunks, right? If we're cutting that large watermelon.
Yeah, especially the thought was that we would try to go up to durian if it was an epic size, but no one wanted durian.
Yeah.
So we stayed at watermelon. And yeah, we would sometimes negotiate to have those go into epics because they were larger projects. Like a watermelon was a wireframe, end-to-end wireframe for user experience to access settings.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually turned out to be a larger journey than we thought. So that turned into an epic instead of being cut into pieces.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
One more question. Do we have time for one?
Well, if we don't, please scan this QR code on the bottom right. That's Release Team's V card. It'll have our contact information, our website, or, you know, since you're here in the flesh, in person, we have a booth outside. Sean and I will be out there to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you so much. Hopefully you have learned something from this talk. I'll be at lunch. Feel free to talk to me, and thank you.